Good evening and a very warm welcome to the third and final day of the webinar Migration, Integration and Identity, the Story of a City.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rupanjana Nandi of Class 12 from Loreto Day School, Bobazar. I really love the initiative taken by Bichitra Pathshala to understand, explore the various reasons for migration and how it influenced the various cultures. Kolkata is indeed a city of diversity. It is also the city of migrants. Kolkata's migrant population is 8.3 lakh, roughly a fifth of the city's total population of 44.9 lakh according to 2011 census. West Bengal's immediate neighbor like Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa and Uttar Pradesh account for most of the Kolkata's migrant population from the other states. To understand the changes which resulted due to migration, I took an interview of my parents, grandparents, and one of my neighbors.
Oh, very good evening to all present here. I'm Tanushree Mukherjee of Class 11 from Loreto Day School, Bobazar. And like every other student taking part in this webinar, I too interviewed my family members to study the effect of migration on them. Firstly, I interviewed my grandmother, who was born in Kolkata in her ancestral home. Her life was very different from the kind of life I lead. She did not have mobile phones or any other electronic gadgets in her hands. The area around her house was covered with trees and playgrounds. At my age, she used to read books by the window or just go out to play with her friends. There were not so many technologically advanced vehicles and therefore much less pollution. They could hear twittering of the birds in the sky. And the families during dinner used to talk to each other because they did not have mobile phones in their hands. She feels her life then was much different than the kind of life I have.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Tanushree. Congratulations. And you have, I guess, the migration behind it. So many things are there. Ethos, you have brought it out. The sense of history and the pictures of those articles of belonging to even generations farther than her grandparents. And there also there is an indication about like a Kashmiri work in a vase. So where that article must have originated, indicating about trade. So she has really got it right, and also the part of culture. She has also included the exchange of cultures. That is. So that is what migration is all about, and she has rightly put it that compassion and tolerance, the values about migration. So very, very well done. Congratulations.
In 1976, the American writer Alex Haley wrote Roots. The book has been widely acclaimed throughout America and throughout the world. It tells the story of the descendants of Alex Haley who were brought into America as slaves. It traces their long journey from Africa to America and from slavery to freedom. The book was made into a mini-series for television. The program Tracing Roots embarks us on the same journey of discovering the homes of our grandparents, of understanding the challenges faced by them, of cataloging their long journey and with it, journey of our parents into the present moment of time. Nana bhasha, nana mot, nana poridhan, bibidher majhe dekho milono mohan. Migration is not just the movement of people from one place to the other, but it is the transfer of cultures and traditions to create a new mingled heritage. Good evening, everyone. This is Ashmita Das of Class 9B from Loreto Day School, Bobazar, and this is my presentation on the Tracing Roots project. The people that I had interviewed: my mother, my neighbor, and my father.
Yeah, is everyone all right? All right, everyone say Bichitra Pathshala.
Bichitra Pathshala.
Now, in my presentation, which is called Retracing the Paths of Migration, I am going to talk about three films, which are of three different types, made in the 21st century. So one is an ad film, the other is a Bengali feature film, and the third one is a documentary film. And in all these three films, you will see the third generation of the migrants, that means the grandchildren of the migrants. They are crossing the Ratcliffe line in search of their homelands and gaining new insights. So we'll see what happens to them when they cross the Ratcliffe line. So the two grandchildren take the destinies of their grandfathers in their own hands, and as a result of that, the other becomes the brother once again. The two get united.
Anji? Gone? Happy birthday, Yara.
So this is a wish fulfillment story. After it's an advertisement, but this wish fulfillment story touches a raw nerve with many an octogenarian on both sides of the Ratcliffe line. And every home in Bengal and Punjab has stories of life left behind on the other side, as we have been hearing in the past 2 days from our students. It also vibes with the young generation who have grown up hearing these stories of their ancestral homes left behind in a hurry when the neighborhood turned hostile and brother became the other. So with that, I now show you a clipping of a Bengali film called Mati, which was made in the year 2018. So here also you will see the same thing. So a girl from his own village, from his homeland, has suddenly come to Calcutta out of the blue, and he's taken by surprise. Kutubdia is his home village. Now we come to the documentary film, which our grandparents' home, which was made by Supriyo Sen as a documentation of a project initiated by Goethe Institute, Max Muller Bhavan.
After nearly 70 years, there is hardly any research on the memories that the third generation of the displaced communities have inherited from their grandparents or parents. As this generation will continue to influence the societies in the coming decades, it is extremely pertinent to explore what memories they have inherited and how they perceive the partition of Bengal in their own times.
So that is what I wanted to share with you, that the memories refuse to die, and when the new generation crosses over and go on exploring, the new truths, new insights are unveiled, which changes their perspective. Okay, so which we saw in the feature film as well as in the documentary film. But it is, I repeat what Mr. Debashish Mukhopadhyay said yesterday, still, the partition theme, films based on partition theme are still few and far between as compared to, let us say, these Holocaust films which are getting made even now in Europe and America. But if more such films are made, if this theme is explored further, then maybe more insights we can gain. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Subha Das Mollick. Your talks on cinema are always very, very riveting because they capture the key moments actually that you are trying to express. And it is true that the two moments that you showed about the lady, going back to Minerva and somebody finding their roots, Mati especially reminded me of my father because these are very similar incidents. So it touches a core point in my heart. So thank you very much for that, Professor Subha Das Mollick. We move on now to our next speaker, who's also going to be dealing with films and migration and films and cinema. Professor Sushmita Pandit is an assistant professor of media studies at the Future Media School, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad University, and is a program manager at an international digital radio channel. She has been a member of Bichitra Pathshala since its inception and has coordinated some of its workshops. We are looking forward to Professor Pandit's talk on In Search of a Homeland, Migration in Hindi Films. I think this will be much appreciated by the young generation.
Yeah, thank you, Shonali-di. And thanks to Shubhadi for giving me this opportunity to be here and to present on popular Hindi cinema, migration depicted in popular Hindi cinema. So considering the recent and unprecedented changes after the COVID-19 pandemic, what we see is that migration has become one of the key issues, not only for the policymakers and government, but also it has emerged as an issue of national debate, even for the common people who are kind of talking about the crisis of migrants and the problems of migration itself. So if we look at Hindi popular cinema, then there is an evident lack of representation in terms of the migrant crisis in India. And on the other hand, if we consider the diasporic themes, then it turns out that it has been one of the most popular narrative tropes which has been used in commercial cinema, particularly after neoliberalization. And the reason behind this paradox is that in the post-independence period, the popular commercial films used to focus on the conflict between modernity and tradition, where the city was generally represented as a signifier of modernity and the rural interiors kind of represented or signified tradition. So if you look at a number of popular films of the 1950s, like Sri 420 or Naya Daur, we may realize that although those films did not focus on the issue of migration, typically in its narrative, that kind of pointedly in this narrative, but this conflict between tradition and modernity often included the crisis of the migrants. So nevertheless, with the advent of neoliberalization and the deregularization of the market in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, along with the parallel influence of globalization, what we see is that the narrative structure of Hindi film as well as the characterization changed. And subsequently, the issue of migration received a different kind of treatment in these films under the neoliberal imperatives. I guess you all are familiar with this particular trope which was used in Hindi films and is still used to a certain extent now. The characters and the issues related to diasporic community, which also is another form of migration, became one of the central themes of commercial Hindi films released in mid-1990s and 2000 onwards. So one of the main reasons is that the non-resident Indian or the NRI category became an aspirational category for the upwardly mobile Indian middle-class audience at that point of time.
Over to you, Professor Kaveri Kaul. We are so looking forward to hearing you speak and address this issue.
Thank you, Shonali. And I just must say thank you for calling me a professor. I'm a mere filmmaker. Pleasure to be here with you all today. Migration is a subject close to my heart. For a filmmaker who is an immigrant, it conjures up all sorts of thoughts about who I might have been and who I've become. So let me take a moment to recognize that migration can take many forms, both in the United States and in India and all over the world. It can mean the forced carrying off of people from their homelands, as happened in the case of African-American slavery in the US, or the mass movement of people leaving behind violence and economic hardship where they come from. Or it can mean the experience of refugees fleeing from tragic natural and man-made disasters. We see a lot of that today, and that narrative is part of my own family's history. It was Rabindranath who said, "To study a banyan tree, you must know not only its main root in its own soil, but you must trace the growth of its greatness in soils further away." The civilization of India, like the banyan tree, has shed its beneficent shade away from its own birthplace. Not the political India, but the ideal India. Those are his words.
Thank you. We heard the teachers talk, and it is time again that we would hear our students share their experience. They have been gathering a lot. Students of Sakhawat Memorial Government Girls High School, Amrita Banerjee and Shantani Khosh, it's your turn to share your experience. Is Amrita here?
Yes, ma'am, I'm present.
Okay. Amrita studies in class 10 and she's an avid reader. And what she studies and love to study is detective stories. And this avid reader of detective stories is also trained in martial arts. She'll now share her experience with us.
Today, my topic is tracing the roots. In this busy lifestyle, we all tend to forget our old days and memories. In search of money, we ignore the call from our roots. Grandparents are the roots of the entire family. They are practical and experienced and have encountered more changes than us. So let us start our journey with them. My grandfather's name is Amrita Banerjee. He became so happy to talk about his childhood. He used to live in Ramchandrapur, a very small village in Purulia. The small village was filled with lot of green at that time, so he grew up with his sister in the lap of the nature. A building becomes home when it holds memories. And one of the scariest memories of my grandfather is when he was a student, he got low marks in exam and locked himself in the bathroom for a very long time to avoid his strict father's cane. After losing his father, he had to leave his home to look for a job. He used to visit his home, but after the demise of his mother, he rarely visited because to him, it never felt the same as old times. The picture here is of my grandfather's house. It is quite big and spacious. He used to run every nook and corner before going to school. My grandparents and parents became so nostalgic while talking about their childhood. This project helped me to discover a new side of them. While doing this project, we all spent some quality time and the bond we have became stronger. I came to know about my roots and the place from where I belong. My grandparents and parents all are uprooted. The reasons were different, but the amount of pain they felt was same. Now they all are separated with their ancestral home by distance, but are connected by memories. Thank you everyone for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Amrita. That was wonderful. And now it is time to introduce Professor Anandalal. Good evening, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Professor Anandalal is the director of Writers' Workshop, a theatre critic with Telegraph for many years, and a retired professor of Jadavpur University Department of English. So we would like to hear from you on Amrita's presentation.
Thank you so much, Shoma. I must make a correction. I left the Telegraph about 3 years ago. I have been reviewing theatre for the Times of India since. So let that be off the record. On the record, theatre critic, Times of India.
Okay, we will put that on record also.
Yeah. But of course, yes, since this session is all about history, that's part of history too. I mean, yes, I was theatre critic from 1986 for over 30 years of the Telegraph. But that aside, Amrita has such wonderful recollections of her grandparents' family roots. And this is something that I heard the first session of presentations as well by the students earlier this evening. And what struck me was that each one of them, and indeed each one of you young audience members, have such fascinating stories to tell about your backgrounds, about your family's backgrounds, because of course we are all migrants. No one in India is not a migrant. No one in the world is not a migrant. But more of that general comment later on. I'm sure we all understand what that means. I was actually quite delighted to find the pictures that Amrita had so carefully put together, because those are all history in the making. They have so much to offer us by way of what the third generation carries on from what the first generation, as far as her presentation was concerned, her grandmother and her grandfather handed down to her. But on to the next presentation. Shoma.
Thank you, sir. That's a wonderful way of reminding us that we are all migrants, and that's a wonderful learning from you today. Shantani Khosh of Sakwat Memorial. This is your turn to present, and Shantani studies in class 10. She specializes in recitation and classical music. Shantani, over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I am Shantani Khosh from Sakwat Memorial Government Girls High School, class 10. I am very happy to be presenting today, and I am going to talk about the project Tracing My Route that I did with my family members. Let me start with a little bit about my grandfather. My grandfather's name was Lakshmikanta Ghosh, who was well-known as a generous person. He was born in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Before 1947, he shifted to Kolkata. After marriage, then he shifted to Baungachi, Howrah. Some of his family members still living in Bangladesh. We have regular connection with them. He was awarded gold medal in secondary examination for mathematics. Probably this explains in my inclination towards mathematics. This is a picture of my grandfather's house. His favorite musical instrument was a Sraj. It also reminds me of my grandfather's favorite musical instrument, a Sraj. We still have his old Sraj in our house.
Thank you so much, Shantani, because you know what? Your Esraj reminds me of something. Can you play the Esraj, Shantani?
No, ma'am. No, sir.
You must learn. Somebody in your generation must learn how to play the Esraj, because hardly anyone in Bengal plays the Esraj anymore.
We now move on. We have an interesting panel discussion. I would just like to introduce you to the moderator, and the moderator is Anjum Katyal.
Good evening. Thank you very much, A. Shonali, for introducing me, and B, to everybody for including me in this wonderful program. I've just sat through a lot of the previous session. It was really fascinating. We are moving on to a panel which looks at the same issues, the issues of migration, which have been discussed from so many interesting perspectives today, and looking at how it is reflected in literature. We've had such an interesting walkthrough and a series of presentations on migration in cinema. And now we come to its close cousin, sister art, the art of writing and literature.
See, migration is a very age-old theme, and people had migrated from since time immemorial, but they got reflected first in literature through religious texts. And from that point of view, to my mind, the oldest migration of which I can remember of from all the books I have read is the book of Exodus, the second book of the Holy Old Testament, recording the migration of Moses from the Egypt to the Holy Land. That is a story by itself. See, I am a very open-minded person, and I study religious texts with a very, very secular mind, not looking into them as texts of religion, but as texts of history, as textbooks of literature. From that point of view, the book of Exodus serves as an excellent example of migration from the oldest times. Though there are other two books, the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah, also from the Old Testament, recording about the wars of the Israelites with Egypt and the Babylonians, and the migration that involved, because of the war, their leaving away their homeland, again returning back, such things.
I would say that brings us to the second half of our discussion, where I would invite Debosri. So Debosri has got very interesting texts and perspectives on migration that happened around the partition and because of the partition. Now, as we all know, the partition is this sort of almost like a watershed in the history of the subcontinent, where both in the West and in the East, huge communities of people were forced to leave their homes and to find a different home, identity, across borders, which became increasingly hard and intransigent. And we have continued to face the outcome of this partition in our literature, in our music, in our arts, in our cinema. And Debosri has some very interesting things to point out about this partition. Debosri, would you like to begin?
Yes, surely. As we all know, the post-colonial literature of the Indian subcontinent is heavily overshadowed by partition literature. And here, I mean partition literature of not just India, but also the works written by writers from what it became West Pakistan, as well as East Pakistan, and of course, modern day Bangladesh. Now, the migration process involves certain phases, starting from the actual journey, the border crossing, and then finally efforts to settle down in a new land, possibly, rebuild their lives, though that has not always been a very smooth process. Now, I would like to mention a few literary works which are not very well known, but still I believe are critical in understanding this very overwhelming experience of the people. First, there's a short story titled Pather Kata by Ramesh Chandra Sen, which was subsequently translated into English as The Thorn in the Path, which actually describes the journey of these people who were running for their lives from Eastern Pakistan to West Bengal, how they could carry little. And of course, they were the masses, so they couldn't even afford a train ride. See, the train is a major metaphor in partition literature as well as cinema. But we must remember that most people couldn't even afford that. So it was the foot journey, which was the only option for such people. There was always the threat of the Ansar Bahini, people who actually sometimes even, robbed and took away not just money, but also the tools, the implements, which would have provided these people a means of earning livelihood in their newly adopted country. So Pather Kata talks about this group, but here what is interesting is that it is not a one-sided perspective. There's a certain section in the story where the protagonist comes across another similar group which is coming from the opposite journey. So we have to remember that, people from both Eastern Bengal as well as Western Bengal uprooted. Of course, the numbers were not always the same. More people came from Eastern Bengal and later present-day East Pakistan. But the experience was almost similar. The same sense of insecurity, of feeling vulnerable, that was the same, irrespective of their religious affiliations.
And I'd like to now, perhaps I think it's time for us to take a few questions and comments from the audience. Is that that was meant to be part of the program?
Yes, so we can invite a few questions, definitely. We can.
So where are we going to look for them? At the chat? Or?
They can either unmute themselves and ask or put in the chat box, whatever suits them.
Right.
May I ask or make a remark?
Of course.
Let me put my...
Please, Anand, carry on.
1 second, I think I've got myself.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Anjum, because, what I had to say, you put it so well, and Amit also has actually referred to this, but, something that has been striking me for so long is that migration is in the human DNA. The map that was shared screen a little while back, which begins in Africa, if it hadn't been for the descendants of Eve moving out of Africa, whether that was voluntary or whether that was a conflict, we really can't, of course, say. And Anjum has pointed out the fact that there can be voluntary migrations as well as enforced and highly devastating, traumatic migrations too. But the fact of the matter is that humans migrate. And to that extent, I'm always wondering why there's so much of a hue and cry, so much of a woe is me about the fact of personal migration stories. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing, but at the same time, it's very much part of human life. And so while we want these stories, we sympathize, we empathize with these stories. At the same time, I miss the sense of the greater historical background of migrations. So that words like, as we all know, Anjum and Debosri and Amit, these words like diaspora, homeland, these are very fraught words. They're normally applied to the contemporary scene, right? But, everybody is diasporic and everybody has had multiple homelands.
Thank you so much, Anjum. Thank you, Amit sir, and thank you, Debosri ma'am, for that very riveting talk on migration and setting new perspectives for us to, it was a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much. I'd like to now, because we've come to the end of the 3-day webinar, I'd like to hand over to Shubhadi to actually give the vote of thanks. But before I hand over to Shubhadi, I would personally like to thank Shubhadi myself for actually including me and taking me through this journey. And like Anjum said that this was a quest, I would actually, even call it a questival. It's a festival of a quest, and really it's been a 3-day journey which has been marvelous, identifying my own little issues when the children brought it up. So thank you, Shubhadi, thank you, Deborina, for really, bringing up an issue of migration and talking about it and putting it out there so that we can all share. Thank you very much. Over to you, Shubhadi.
Thank you. So thank you, Shonali. First of all, thank you for anchoring this evening's program with such warmth and efficiency. And of course, the first thank you should go to Deborina for thinking of a subject like this and offering it to Bichitra Pathshala to take it up and maybe give it further shape and condensing some of the nebulous ideas, etc. So thank you, Deborina, for thinking of an idea like this and offering it to Bichitra Pathshala. So these 3 days of the webinar have really been a roller coaster, intellectually extremely stimulating. A lot of hard work has gone behind. A lot of people have put in their efforts, and we are very fortunate that so many of you have agreed to be a part of it and join in and share your thoughts and contribute in your unique way. So I'm not naming each of the speakers or panelists. I have just thank you to all the speakers and and moderators and panelists and everybody for agreeing to be a part of this. And thank you to the organizers who are doing the back-end job, who are continuously even now doing the back-end job, like Shaurina and Devika, and Deborina is also doing some of the back-end job, and the others who are making sure that everything is moving on smoothly and without much of a glitch. Like today we shared some Hollywood film, not Hollywood, sorry, Bollywood film clippings and even Bengali film clippings. As a result, Facebook has stopped our live streaming because, we were using copyrighted material, so Facebook has stopped our live streaming. So all these things our back-end volunteers are taking care of, so they will do the needful, whatever has to be done. So the three days have, at last it has come to an end, leaving us with a lot of food for thought and a lot of homework for all of us. I don't know how many students are still there, but I'm sure the message will go to the students because they will have to take it up. We are inviting research proposals from them. They have to submit us research proposals on any area of their choice. It may be cinema, literature, music, costume, anything, any area of their choice. And they will get a little more than 2 months to do their own research and submit their research work. And finally, on the 30th of March, after all the board exams and all are over, we will have presentations by the students. And so hopefully we will meet all of you once again at that time. And in the meantime, a request to all the experts and the speakers that if the students need some guidance from you, maybe, access to some resource material, or they want to verify some facts or a little bit of guidance, so they might knock at your door and please help them out in your small way. I am not asking you that devote a lot of time, but just, giving them some leads, so they might need from you, so please help them out. Like somebody might do their own research on migration in Bengali literature, so Debosri is the right person, so maybe Debosri can spend a little time to guide the student if a proposal comes to us like that. So that request is with all the speakers and all the eminent people who have been with us all these 3 days. And with that, I think it is time to say au revoir to everybody. And hopefully we will meet again in March when the students will make their research presentations.